Hi everyone. So in my today's session, I'm going to demonstrate how to protect ASP.NET Core Web API using Microsoft Azure Cloud and using the Microsoft Entra ID based app registration. With this demonstration, I'm going to make use of the app registration scopes in order to demonstrate the power of scopes in order to protect your web APIs. Okay, so let's start with it. The first thing we need to do is let's go to the app registrations. Okay, so we need to create an app registration over here for our web API. So click on new app registration, give a meaningful name, say web API, name it core API basically, and then dev environment. Okay, name should be meaningful. So supported account types, I'm going to support accounts in my organizational directory only. Okay, but there are other options also. You can invite other directory, other Microsoft Entra ID tenants into your tenant basically. You can invite the Skype account, Microsoft personal accounts also. So I would like to go with this single tenant approach. Okay, I'm not going to configure any redirect URI because this is a API application. Okay, so click on register. Yeah, so the app registration has been created successfully. Okay, so if you see the overview page, very important piece of setting or information which I will be making use of from this app registration is my client ID or application ID. Okay, this is the information, and then also I need the directory ID or tenant ID which will be same across my tenant. Okay, so once this has been set up properly, now the next step is I need to expose this API. Okay, so whenever you design web APIs or microservices in any cloud platforms, I'm taking example of Microsoft Azure over here. Okay, first step comes is creating the abstraction or representing your API application or a microservice application. And how you do that? You create app registration. Okay, whatever applications you design and develop on cloud platform, each and every application should be associated with the app registration. This is the mechanism through which you provide authentication and authorization as well as identity. Okay, so do remember that point. So the first step, I created app registration for my API application. I got an app ID. I have my tenant ID over here. Now I have to expose this API. Always remember, if you don't expose an API after creating it on Azure, it can't be accessed. Okay. So whilst exposing an API, the first step is you have to set up an application ID URI. So click on this add. So the syntax will look something like this. The format is API colon slash slash your client ID basically. Okay, your API's client ID will be put here. But if you want, you can put something like www.xyz.com also. Up to you. Okay, so I would like to go with the default convention. Let's save it. Then comes the important step of adding scope. Okay, so what is a scope basically? A scope in Microsoft Azure app registrations defines custom scopes to restrict access to data and functionality protected by the API. Okay, an application that requires access to parts of this API can request that a user or admin consent to one or more of these. Okay, in simple words, if you have 100% of your API's data and functionality, if your API has n number of functionalities, using the mechanism of scopes, you can provide, basically you can split them into parts in such a way that the end users or applications can basically make use of small part which they require. No need to provide entire access to all the API and its data functionalities. Okay, so that is the use of scopes. Let me create a scope over here. Say I will call it forecast dot read. Okay, and who can consent this particular access to my web API. Okay, I would like to make the consent can be given by admins as well as users. I will use the same name, the consents display name, and then the description also, and I would like to keep the state in enabled. When it is enabled, then only the scope will be applied. Okay, if it is disabled, it's of no use. Okay, so add scope. So I have added the scope successfully now. Okay, so the second part is done. the application ID URI setup and scope has been set up. So now I need to move towards the code side. Okay, always remember, when you are developing any kind of application development, okay, it may be a client application or a API application, first setup will happen from the cloud side. You create a abstraction of app registration. Okay, all this piece of information is necessary in order to authenticate the user and then perform the authorization. Then you go to the code side. Okay, so let me open the Visual Studio Code and create a web API project. So I have opened Visual Studio Code and .NET New Web API weather forecast application I want to create. So hit enter, it should create. Yes, it successfully created the project. Okay, and now I need to provide a support for HTTPS. So let me put that command. Basically .NET dev-certs HTTPS-trust will allow you to trust the development certificates. Okay, but in production environment you can't make use of development certificates, you have to buy one. Okay, do remember that point. So let me hit enter. Yeah, successfully trusted the existing HTTPS certificate. Okay, once this is done, now I need to add the important piece of information. Okay, so let me get into that project, that is the weather forecast. Clear the screen, then come over here, app settings.json. Okay, so here I need to provide the necessary information which is associated with my API app, that is the app ID, tenant ID, okay, the domain, instance, all those information I need to add over here. So let me quickly do that. So let's paste it over here. So this is the most important section. You can give whatever name you want, but for accepted conventions, I'm going to use Azure AD as the name. Instance basically tells you the URL where you are going to retrieve the token, the access token. Okay, so this is where you are going to basically authenticate yourself by providing you as a username and password, or your app ID, client ID, and its secret. Okay, and then your client ID is the client ID which we generated over here. That is, go to the overview page. Yes, this is your app ID. Basically, put it over here. Okay, and then the tenant ID is nothing but my directory ID, this one. Over here, and yes, I have provided a scope, that is forecast.read, so that's verified, same or not. Go to expose API, and yeah, forecast.read, that's correct. Okay guys, okay, same, no spelling errors. Okay, tab, yeah. So this is the important piece of information that needs to be added over here, and this setting will be used in the setup that I'm going to do in program.cs, where I am going to basically integrate the Microsoft's identity platform in order to integrate authentication and authorization. Okay, now before doing that, I need to install one library which is provided by Microsoft, which is called microsoft.identity.web. Okay, let's do that quickly. Okay guys, so .NET add package, which is microsoft.identity.web, install the latest one. Don't have any problem with that. Let's install it. It will take a little time. Let it. So as the microsoft.identity.web has been successfully installed, now I will add the code which will basically enable the authentication and authorization. Okay, so paste it over here. Okay, so put a builder, because I'm using builder services. Okay, I need to add some namespaces, you know, to refer these JWT bearer defaults, which is coming from Microsoft ASP.NET Core authentication.jwt bearer. Okay, and then this call will be from Microsoft.identity.web, an extension. Okay, so that's it over here, and yeah, again, as we are using the .NET new syntax where we will not specify a specific main method as an entry point. So whatever configuration we do, we directly do in the program.cs. So here I need to make use of builder and then configuration. Yeah, builder will provide the configuration option. Okay. So if you provide a key observation over here, the signature provided by this, okay, the configuration section name, the default argument basically, okay, the default argument has been assigned to a value of Azure AD. So it is not necessary to specify once again over here. Even if you skip it, not a problem, because if you see my app settings.json, I have also followed the same convention, okay, Azure AD. So the passing of just the configuration object itself is sufficient, because as there is a named or the optional parameter which is already have a default value assigned Azure AD, so it will pick this configuration section for us automatically. Okay, so now first step is adding these authentication services and adding the Microsoft identity web API model, and then after adding you have to use it, right? So before use HTTPS, sorry, after use HTTPS redirection and before use authorization, you need to just add a middleware called app dot say use authentication. Okay. Now, after adding this statement only, the authentication will take place. If you miss this, then the authentication won't work, guys. Okay, just to remember that. So I have added this middleware over here. So from the code side, I'm almost done. Now, yes, at the controller level also, we need to apply the authorize attribute. So let me do that quickly. So I have added the authorize attribute. So in order to access any endpoint from this weather forecast API, first of all, the user should be authenticated user. Then I'm specifying out of n number of endpoints provided by this weather forecast controller. At present, there is only one. If there are n number of action methods, then only for the required action methods, okay, you can specify a scope. Okay, so what I'm going to do is identity.web.resource. I'm specifying the scope. So token which is coming with this particular scope, okay, only those can be, okay, only such request can access this endpoint basically. Okay, let me do that. Correct it. Okay, that's done. Okay, so in order to access this particular endpoint or action method, the required scope is forecast.read. Okay, do remember, if there are one more endpoint and if that endpoint is missing this particular required scope attribute, right, then that endpoint won't be accessible by the end user or end user application. Okay, the API will return a 403 forbidden error. Okay, so do remember this point. So in order to access this particular endpoint, the required scope is forecast.read. Okay, so same scope you can directly put at the controller level only. If you have a requirement that for this particular controller, all the endpoints should adhere to this requirement where the scope, it should come up with the scope of forecast.read, then you can directly put it at the controller level itself. Not a problem. Okay. So I want to demonstrate it with just one endpoint level. So I have added it over here. Okay. So this is done. With this setup, let's quickly build and verify if it works. Yeah, issue a .NET build. Okay, build is successful, and let me run now. .NET run. Yeah. Now the application is up and running, guys. So let's verify in the browser. So when I tried to access the weather forecast endpoint, I got 401 unauthorized, which means yeah, the authentication flow is working fine. Okay, now let's see how to access this API by authenticating ourselves. Okay, so let's start with, I will make use of Postman product. So I have logged into my Postman online account. So create a new tab over here for the new request. Okay, specify the method as get. In my case it is get, and then this is my URL. Okay, now under the authorization tab, where you need to set the authorization header, right? So here you need to select the OAuth 2.0. Okay, the type of the authorization that we are doing is OAuth 2.0. Okay, so select that. Once that is done, add authorization data to request headers. Okay, let me configure this quickly, guys. So once you select the OAuth 2 here, you have to configure this configure new token section. Okay, don't do anything here under current token. Under configure new token section, provide a token name. I'm giving it as a bearer, grant type, authorization code. Okay, callback URL. See, you can't modify this callback URL. Okay, the callback URL cannot be modified when authenticating via the browser, because when we try to generate a token, right, it basically sends a request through browser. Okay, so keep it as it is, and one extra step we need to do. Okay, I'm going to explain that. So what you need to do is you need to copy this callback URL, a URL which is generated from the Postman side. Okay, auth.postman.io, a kind of dummy URL. You can give anything, but because we are going to use this integrated browser with this Postman, it has generated it for us. Copy that and go to your app registration. Let me show you. This is your app registration, right? So click over here. So this is our app registration. Go to authentication and here add platform. Okay, click on the add platform and select web. Okay, and here you need to enter that redirect URL. Okay, browser hyphen callback. Okay, what happens, when the authentication takes place, if you are authenticated successfully, in that case it basically attaches the authorization token or the auth token into the uh, redirect URI provided by Microsoft, and it also contains this information, the redirect URI for your application. Okay, so the endpoint used to authenticate your user is login.microsoftonline.com. Okay, so from that URL you basically perform your authentication, and once the authentication is successful, basically the token will be returned attached to this redirect URI. So using this placeholder, basically the postman will extract your access token. Okay, using this redirect URI. So for that you need to enable this, and you have to select the tokens you would like to be issued by the authorization endpoint. Yeah, I want access tokens. Okay, guys, so select that. For implicit and hybrid flows you can use ID tokens. Okay, so I'm selecting access token because I'm using web API, so I will be using access token. So I will say configure. Okay, now once this is done, so we will move on to our postman now. Now, the another important piece of information is auth URL, basically where you are going to authenticate yourself. The end, see that what it says, the endpoint for authorization server. This is used to get the authorization code. So go to your app registration. Okay, go to the overview page, click on endpoints, and here you need to select this one. Yeah, authorization, because you want authorization code, right? So you have to authorize yourself. So just copy it. Okay, and let's paste it over here. Okay, so it contains your tenant ID. Okay, now access token URL. Okay, the endpoint for authentication server. This is used to exchange the authorization code for an access token. Okay, so first is authorization URL, second is access token URL. Okay, that also you can find it over here only, that is this one, the token endpoint. Okay, this is the authorization endpoint and this is the token endpoint. Copy this and paste it over here. Okay, So let's put the token URL. Okay. So this is basically a OAuth 2 specification. So whatever framework, whatever cloud platform you use, this will be common, guys, if you are using OAuth 2.0 for your authentication and authorization. Okay. So this is the endpoint where my authorization and as well as authentication will take place. Login.microsoftonline.com with my tenant ID. Okay. Client ID. What is client ID? Client ID is nothing but your app ID. Okay. So go over here, close this blade and take this client ID from here and put it over there. Okay. And now most important stuff, I need to generate a client secret now. Okay. The client secret is issued to the client. Till now we have not done that step. So let me do that quickly. Go to your app registration and under certificates and secrets, under client secrets, generate one. Okay. So I'm generating, let's give a name. Okay. Say API secret. Okay. And you can specify the period for what period you want. Okay. So I'm going with 6 months default. See, it has successfully generated a secret now. Copy this secret. Okay. And then paste it in the postman. Okay, paste it over here. Set use variable. Okay, these are the postman warnings, don't worry. Now most important stuff, scope. You remember we had created a scope, guys. Okay, so that scope I have to pull over here. So go to the expose an API and copy this API URI over here. This basically contains your scope forecast.read. So paste it into the postman window. Come over here and put the scope. Okay, I think that's it. These are the required piece of information. Don't worry about client authentication. Okay, keep it as it is, whatever is there. Okay, so let me check now. So as I have filled, I have done a round of verification where I was able to generate the token, guys. So as the details, we selected OAuth 2.0 over here, add authorization data to request headers. We selected this request to headers option, and under configure new token section, I given a name, any name you can give, bearer, callback URL. Okay, any URL you can give. But yeah, do remember, as I already explained, the same URL should be there in the reply URL of your app registration, which comes somewhere over here. Yeah, they should match. That's it. Okay. And yeah, the authentication authorization URL which I copied from here, which you have already seen. Okay, this is the authorized endpoint and this is the token endpoint which I had put there. Client ID or the app ID of my app registration, as I already explained over here. This is the app ID. Okay, and then I generated a secret for that, which I have shown you already, the secret, and then I specify the scope. Okay, so when I said get a new access token, as you can see, get new access token, it's already done because it opened another browser window where it asked me to enter my username and password. It authenticated successfully and it returned this token. Okay, so click on just use token. Okay, token added, and if you send the request, you see basically my localhost colon 5143 is returning weather forecast data. Okay, with the required scope forecast.read. Okay, guys. So I hope you people understood the crux of protecting an web API using Microsoft Entra ID based authentication and authorization. Okay, very simple, guys. So as I illustrated, first step comes with creating your app registration, which I created over here. Okay, so I created an app registration. Okay, I got the application ID and directory ID information, most important being app ID or the client ID. Okay, then I exposed this API. Always remember, in order for a client applications to consume your web API, there should be at least one scope specified. If you don't specify any scopes, they can't access. Okay, so in order to generate an access token, it's must that you should have at least one scope. So I generated a application ID URI, then I created a scope by using the add scope button, okay, which is an enabled state. Okay. And post that, in order to access it from the postman, I did some configurations. The most important one being let me go to the administration, the right one. Yeah, this is the one. Yeah, correct. So I generated a redirect URI, a dummy URI basically, which Postman will use to extract the access token from that. Okay, and post that, I went from the code side, and from the code side, I created a web API project. In the app settings.json, I added the Azure AD section. The important piece of settings being instance or the host where we are going to authenticate ourselves. That's the login.microsoftonline.com. The client ID is nothing but the app ID which we generated. Tenant ID is my directory tenant ID, and then the scopes I created basically forecast.read. Okay, and then in the controller, I put the authorized attribute at the controller level so that in order to access any endpoint, you must be authenticated user. Okay, and then at one of the endpoint or the action method called get, I put a required scope. Okay, that's forecast.read. Okay, if the incoming request doesn't contain this required scope, then the code will fail and it will return HTTP status code 403, guys. Okay, so the expectation is that the access token must contain its under its roles attribute, it should contain this forecast.read claim basically, or the scope, I would say. If it is missing in the scopes collection, then it will return 403 forbidden error. Let me show that quickly. So under expose an API, go here and just disable this scope, save it. Okay, go to the postman and hit the request. Let me generate the token once again. It's the old one. So over here, clear cookies. Now get a new token. So my email ID. Then the prompt will prompt from password. So I have been authenticated. Okay, authentication complete. Proceed. It is asking me to get this new token. Okay, I will use this token. Now I will send the request. Can you see, guys? 403 forbidden, because whatever token I have received now doesn't contain this required scope forecast.read, because I have disabled it on my app registration. But what code is expecting? Code is expecting that this scope should be present in the token, access token, in order to access this. That's why this particular call got failed with error 400 forbidden. If I enable this particular scope once again, it will work. Okay, more on scopes and permissions I'm going to explain in my new video. In this video, I have just shown how to protect a web API, guys. Okay, so I'm going to explain more on app roles as well as the scopes in the next videos. Okay, when we provide scopes and permission to individual applications, okay, other applications or other API applications which want to access this API. Okay, so that's what I did. So this we verified, and then from the postman side we did the rest of the setup, whereas my postman acted as a client application. So here in the authorization tab, I selected the type as auth 2.0, add authorization data to request header, and then I added all the required information. I generated the token and verified. Okay, so thanks for listening and have a nice day, guys.